Okay, let's start today's lecture. This is week 3, and we are talking about our all important topic, which is malicious software or malwares. If you notice, from here on, we are going to talk specifically on the issues that we come across in computer security. In the first week, we talked about the aims of the security and why security is important. And in second week, we learned the basic definitions in computer security, like threat, vulnerability, exploits, countermeasures, risks, and other such information. And from this week and onwards, we are going to talk specifically on the issues that come across in our daily lives and that are very important in computer security. We will be talking about cryptography, hashing, network security, application level security, and other such things. So this week is malicious software, and your first assignment is related to malware, where you are required to select 2 malwares and 2 real world incidents, and then you need to report as per the requirements stated in the assignment brief. So how can we define malware? Malware is a short form for malicious software, and we can define malware as a software that is designed to infiltrate, damage, or disrupt a computer system without the informed consent of the user or the owner of that system. What is a software? Software is essentially a set of instructions that run on any kind of electronic device. It need not to be a computer system, it need not to be a laptop. Any electronic device is enabled using a software, and any such device can be compromised with the help of a malicious software. As I have been telling you that NIST is one of the important standards in the cybersecurity arena. The more formal definition of malware as per NIST special publication 800-83 is malware is a program that is inserted into a system usually covertly with the intent of compromising the 3 aims of security, that is confidentiality, integrity, or availability of the victim's data, applications, or operating system, or otherwise annoying or disrupting the victim. It need not to be with the intent of destroying the data. It can be with the intent of just to annoy the user or the company on which you are launching, or the cyber criminal is launching a malware attack. So what could be the consequences of malware? This is not the complete list. These are just of the few consequences that are relevant to malware when a system is compromised. It can steal your personal information. It monitors your computer activity. It may install additional softwares by establishing a backdoor or trapdoor. It lowers the overall state of the security in that computer system or that information organization on which the attack has been launched. It can enable profiteering scams, and it may use the resources of a computer system, such as CPU, RAM, and other such things. One thing I want to clear here, that there is a common misconception that malware are only relevant to Windows operating system. It is not the case. Mac, Linux, your other electronic devices such as IoTs and critical infrastructures are all prone to malware attacks. The reason we hear a lot about Windows is that there is a large chunk of people around the world who use Windows as compared to Mac and other operating systems. That's why we hear a lot about Windows malwares, but this is not the case. In reality, malware can be launched against any of the operating system, any of the electronic devices. So how a system becomes vulnerable to malware? A system becomes vulnerable to malware because of flaws or bugs in the software that is installed on the on that system, be it an operating system or the application software that you are using. Overprivileged users or system processes, flaw in the design of software or a system, poorly implemented standard operating procedure environments, and lack of awareness education surrounding the topic of malware. What do you understand by the term standard operating environment here? Does anyone have any idea that what is an SOE? Yes, but why we use the term SOE? It is relevant to operating system, yes, you're correct. But why we are using the term SOE here? Default may not be the right word, but yes, it is the standard settings that we normally take to install the operating system on our computers, and we do not implement security features, because for this, to enable those security features, we need to do some extra steps which we normally do not take in a standard operating environment. So people who solely rely on the SOEs without taking into consideration the security aspect of that particular software, application, or operating system, those standard operating environments are prone to malware attacks. The graph on this slide is showing you the increase in total malware since 1984 till last year, and you can see the increase in the drastic increase from 2012 or 2013, and you can see how malwares are increasing every day. And it is because that the philosophy or the motivation behind the malicious attacks has been changed from individual users to organized crime. So in these days, the malware were launched by the individuals or a group of friends for their own purposes. But when you see the drastic change here, it is because the motivation of the attackers has been changed, and we're going to discuss this motivation in the next few slides. This graph has been taken from one of the site, AV Test. If you go to Symantec or Malwarebytes or other, you might not see the same figures, but yes, this is generally this is acceptable graph because of the fact that there is an increase in the malicious software's activities. This, I mean, these figures may be different if you go to different vendors or different security organizations, but there's a general agreement, there's a general consensus that yes, there is a drastic increase from 2012 onwards on this malicious software development and their launching. However, if we look at the new malware between the same time, you may see, you will observe a decline from 2015 onwards, and look at the 2018. This graph was taken in the middle of 2018, so this might increase a bit further, but there is a decline which you can observe at this side of the graph. So can anyone tell me what could be the reason, what could be the possibilities why there is a decline in the new malware development? If you look at this graph, there's an increase, constant increase every year. But why there is a decline in the development of new malwares? What could be the reason behind it? Yes. Yes. But we are talking about new forms of the malware. This is a new malware. But why do you think there is a decline in this graph here? What could be the possible reason? Yes.
The intention of the cyber criminals has yet to change.
So
So you said that it changed before during that period of time.
I said the motivation has been changed, you know. That's why there was an increase in the total malware deployment. But why there is an increase in the new malware? Ideally, it should have gone up here. But why there is a decline here? What could be the possible reason? Yes, this is somewhat relevant answer, because now the malware developers are giving more time on the sophistication of the malware development. They do not want to develop a new malware. They want to develop a malware which is more sophisticated, which is stealthier, which cannot be tracked by the anti-malware technologies that are available out there in the market. So people are, rather than investing more on developing new malwares, they are working on less number of malwares, but they are trying to make those malwares more sophisticated with the aim that they cannot be detected, and they maintain their persistence in the networks or the computer system that they are attacking. Yes.
Is that anything to do with the more of these criminals trying to find 0 days instead of like looking at malware and database?
0 days or advanced persistent threats is an example of sophistication, because if you find a 0-day attack, a vulnerability which has never been reported, they do not need to develop a new malware, because somewhere the malware to that vulnerability is already available. So they are going to use that, leverage that malware, do some extra stuff into that malware, and deploy that malware against that vulnerability. So yes, 0 days attacks and advanced persistent threats are the common concepts in the malware domain, and you need to be aware of these concepts. We will be discussing about 0 days and APTs in the coming slides today. So we sort of discussed these agents in week 2. So as I explained in the earlier slide, that the motivation behind the attacker or the cyber criminal is changing from being a singular entity to becoming an organized crime. So the threat agents behind the malware development, or the people who launch malware, ranges from the politically motivated attackers, criminals, organized crime, to national or government agencies, which is also known as state-sponsored espionage activities. It is a very common word nowadays. If you search on Google with the title state-sponsored espionage, you will come across a lot of articles which are relevant to national government agencies. When I use the word national government agency or state-sponsored espionage activities, it means that a government is launching an attack against another government. A country is launching an attack against another government. If you have read about the Australian Parliament attack that happened last month, there's a voice that attack was actually launched by another country. That may not be true, that may be true, but this is what the example of a state-sponsored espionage, or a national government agency attacking another national government agency. Okay? And the other thing here is that malware development has become an industry now. It's an, honestly speaking, it's a true economy in the underworld. People are stealing your information. They are selling them on the dark web. Like we discussed few cases in our first lecture, when we discussed about Marriott Hotel compromise, where the information about your credit card details, your date of birth, and another example we discussed about stealing of your medical information. All this information is being sold in the underworld, so everything has got a money associated to it. So it's an economy, and it is becoming a huge economy in the underworld. People are earning a lot because of these softwares. And like someone mentioned here that about crimewares. So we are going to discuss about crimeware in next slide, but essentially crimeware is a tool which allows you to develop or to launch malwares against your targeted entity, against the victim, and those crimeware toolkits are being sold openly on the internet. So it has literally become an economy, and people earn a lot of money out of this. This is not the complete list of malware categories. A few viruses, Trojan horses, worms, rootkits, logic bombs, scarewares, ransomware, all these forms of attacks comes under the category of malware. There is no universal consensus on the definitions of these categories. It depends on the book that you refer to. It depends on the article you are reading. Often the definition of viruses, worms, rootkits overlaps. I have added in your today's reading, I have added one of the a chart taken from the William Starling book, where I have given you the definition of all forms of malwares, viruses, Trojan horses, worms. Just read those malwares, but if you read another document and you find that there is a difference of definition, do not get confused. There is a lack of consensus universally on the definitions of all these categories of malwares. If we have to classify malwares broadly, we can categorize malwares into the way they propagate and the payload that they contain. So generally, a malware can be categorized into these two categories: propagation and payload actions. There were some earlier approaches in malware categorization. One of the approaches was malware were being classified based on the needs a host program, requirement of the host program, such as parasitic codes such as viruses, and those that are independent, self-contained programs such as worms, Trojan, and bots. Another approach for classification of malware is malware that does not replicate, such as Trojans, spams, and emails, and malware that does replicate, such as worms and viruses. However, we'll stick to this definition, which is this categorization, which is propagation and payload action that they perform, and we're going to discuss these two classifications in the next few slides. What is a propagation mechanism? Infection of existing content, such as executables, exe files that are available on your system, by viruses that is subsequently spread to other systems. So if an executable is infected by a virus or any form of malware, when that executable is executed on your computer, it may spread to other files on your computer. It may affect the other files, and if your computer is connected on the internet, and if you transfer those files over the network, then that infected file will travel across your network. Propagation mechanism exploits software vulnerabilities using drive-by-download mechanism to allow the malware to replicate, and it also employs social engineering attacks to convince the users that yes, this is the utility that you need to have on your system, and you can install that utility. And once that utility is installed, there's a backdoor or trapdoor there, or a Trojan there, which can start compromising the information that is available on the computers or the systems. So what are payload actions? Payload is corruption of system or data files. In propagation mechanism, we were actually infecting the files, and once the file is infected, when they perform any corruption to the information that is contained in that system, then it becomes a payload associated to that malware. Payload actually can theft the services that are running on the operating system, and they also become zombies or bots. They are very stealthy. Because once they are into the system, they spread unprecedentedly, and it is very difficult for the anti-malware solutions that are configured on the systems to actually detect or delete those malicious softwares. And then there is another term which is known as blended attack. It is a combination of propagation and payload action. When you employ multiple propagation or payload mechanisms, then it becomes a blended attack. When we talk about propagation, we are talking about only one specific activity. When we talk about payload, we are talking about one specific activity that out of the activities that we have discussed here. But blended attack is the combination of multiple propagation or payload activities that we perform to launch an attack. So, crimeware or malware attack kits. Traditionally, the development of malware required considerable technical skills and knowledge. However, since I have informed you earlier that it has now become an industry, the malware kits are available for even for the novice users. They can download those malware kits free of cost or by paying very cheap amount, and then they can download those malware kits, toolkits which are known as crimeware, and then they can start getting into the malware development process, and that malware development process is very simple, and they can by following some basic steps, they can develop a malware, a new variant of the malware, and they can launch that malware against that particular entity which they wanted to tease or get some information out of those computers. Commonly used kits include Zeus, Angler, Nuclear, Black Hole, Sakura, and Phoenix. Zeus is the toolkit that got famous in 2013 and onwards, and it was primarily launching attacks against the banking information. It was stealing the banking credentials of the users. But I'm going to discuss about Angler attack. Angler was first seen in 2013 and it became more active in 2015. In 2015, it accounted for approximately 40% of the malware attacks that were observed in the entire year. And Angler was focusing on the outdated software vulnerabilities, primarily on the outdated software vulnerabilities that are there on in the browsers that we are using, such as Internet Explorer, Firefox, or Chrome. And it had the strong evasion mechanism, thereby the antivirus softwares, anti-malware techniques were unable to detect Angler or the deployment of Angler. So, if you look at this slide, look at this step. A malicious ad is posted on a legitimate site. A user visits the legitimate website and find a malicious ad there which is attracting that user. As soon as the user clicks on this malicious ad, it redirects it to the compromised website, which is step 2. And once it is redirected to the compromised website, internally it is redirected to this web page, which is one of the pages on this website. So, that Angler web page, which is hosted on this website, actually looks into the vulnerabilities that are there in the browser that this user is using. So, for example, if this user is using Firefox or Chrome and that is not patched, that is not updated, when this user visits a legitimate website and finds an ad there which entices that user, and if he clicks or he or she clicks on this ad, he will be redirected to the compromised website. Then this user will be internally redirected to the Angler web page where this Angler malicious software is installed. And once the user is here, this malware looks into the vulnerabilities of the Firefox browser that it is using. And if the user is, for example, using Java or Flash, the outdated versions of these two tools or some other tools or that the user has installed on Firefox, if there's a vulnerability, this malicious entity or cyber criminal launches an attack and exploits the user and creates a malware or backdoor on the user's PC, and from there on, this computer is all cyber criminals. Every information can be taken from this computer. Just by not having an updated software or the updated internet browser that the user is using, the Angler was able to get into the user computer and delete or copy or create multiple versions of the files. We do not know what the intent of the user is, of the cyber criminal is, but we do know that any software vulnerability can compromise the computer that you are using with the outdated software. So, whatever I've explained here, this process is the example of drive-by downloads type of malware. So, the advanced persistent threats, what do you know about these APT attacks? What are these APTs? The advanced persistent threats, APTs, are the well-resourced, persistent application of a wide variety of intrusion technologies and malware to selected targets, usually businesses or political. What do you understand by this? What do we mean by well-resourced? It is relevant to the slide in which we discussed motivation of the attackers or the motivation of the malware or the cyber criminals. This is one of the reasons why there is a decline in the new malware development, because the malware agents or the threat agents or the threat entities are working on small number of malwares, but they are trying to develop them in a more sophisticated way that they become stealthier. They are unable to be pointed out by the anti-malware solutions that are there on the systems. So, by well-resourced means they have got ample amount of expertise with themselves, which they employ on the development of the malware, that in turn makes that malware more sophisticated and persistent and more difficult to be detected. Typically attributed to state-sponsored organizations and criminal enterprises, we have already discussed, differ from other types of attack by their careful target selection and stealthy intrusion efforts over extended periods. When we talk about APTs, we are talking about targeted attacks. We are not talking about the general forms of attack. APT attacks are against the targeted entities. They can never be an APT attack on the general public, in the wild. APT is always launched, always designed against the particular entity that you want to attack in, that the people want to attack into. The few examples I have added in this slide are Stuxnet. You must be aware of this worm or malware that was spotted in 2010, and since then we are still finding the different variants of Stuxnet. The next APT is Energetic Bear. It was launched in 2014, and it compromised 1,000 different energy firms around the world. Mainly the firms were from the United States, but in total it compromised approximately 1,000 energy firms or the power grids. Then there's Black Energy. It was launched in 2015 against Ukraine's power grid, and once that malware was launched, the entire capital of Ukraine, or not the entire, but the major portion of the Ukraine's capital was without power, without any electricity. Yes, they have been detected. That's why I've included them on this slide. They have been detected, but the problem is that in case of Stuxnet, the developer of Stuxnet have made this entire source code available on the internet. So any other malicious entity can go onto the internet, download this Stuxnet software, understand how it works. Just by doing some minor tweaks, another variant of Stuxnet can be launched. And this is what I'm doing in my PhD. You know, I'm studying all the variants of these APT attacks. So I have got APT attacks, different versions of the APT attacks, and I analyze those APT attacks, different variants of, like if I give you the example of Stuxnet, I have got 8 or 10 different samples of Stuxnet. So I run all those samples, all those binary files in an isolated environment, and I take the feature set of those different variants of Stuxnet, and then I analyze those different variants. So all those variants have got something different. So anything that can be changed in the Stuxnet variant can be launched as a different attack. That's why we use the term well-resourced persistent. So if someone knows how to detect Stuxnet 1.0, that entity may not be knowing how to detect Stuxnet 2.0. Yes, please.
Are the next versions of Stuxnet aimed at the PLCs, or can you change it to somebody else?
Stuxnet was designed against industrial control systems or cyber physical systems, or what could be the other name? I use the term industrial control system, and the more, the new name of the industrial control system or the SCADA system is cyber physical systems. Stuxnet was primarily designed for ICS, and all the variants that I am studying, whatever I have come across till today, they have all been launched against the industrial control systems or the SCADA systems. So they were primarily designed for the cyber physical systems or the ICS systems. Like if I give you the example of Triton, this attack, this was launched in 2017, and it was launched against the Saudi Aramco company, which is one of the petrochemical company in Saudi Arabia. So it attacked the industrial control components in the Saudi Aramco, and it actually compromised the system. It was actually shutting down their entire entity, entire factory, entire industrial control system.
But Stuxnet originally was for the centrifuges and the
Yes.
enrichment plant.
Yes.
Can you take out the centrifuges and import something else into that code so it
Yes.
does
Yes.
but
Yes.
yeah, okay.
Yes. If you wait for next 10 minutes, I have added a video here on Stuxnet, and you will get your answer there. You know, it's a 2.5 minute video.
Yeah, well, I'm doing it for the one, Stuxnet's one of my
Okay. It is possible, but that video that I'm showing you, I will show you next few slides, next 5 minutes. That is going to help you a lot in your assignment, as well as developing understanding how APT works, what is a zero-day attack, why they have become more important on all these years since 2010. Okay.
You know how malwares like normally auto-executables and auto-run files and stuff? Where do the APTs that have been found normally hide, like in the systems?
In the systems,
Where are they normally hidden?
I'll answer this question after you see that video, because the answer to this question lies in the video. You know, I have purposefully added that video in the morning because I wanted you to understand in totality how Stuxnet has worked, penetrated into the Iran centrifuges, and what it actually did in the Iran centrifuges. What was it actually doing? You know, it has actually found the vulnerability that was there in one of the industrial control system, and as soon as that vulnerability was exploited, their centrifuges were being controlled by that malicious software. And the fascinating thing about that malware was the users or the observers who were actually viewing those centrifuges were still getting the same feed. You know, they were still thinking that my centrifuge is working perfectly fine, whereas the centrifuge wasn't working at all. You know, they were working at a high speed. You know, it was spinning at a much larger speed as compared to the normal or the acceptable speed that is required for a centrifuge to work. The display was showing that it is working perfectly normal, but in reality it was not working. You know, it was working way higher than the acceptable speed of that centrifuge. So we have used 3 words: advanced, persistent, and threats. So let's understand what do we mean by the word advanced. Used by the attackers of a wide variety of intrusion technologies and malware, including the development of custom malware if required. That's why we use the term advanced, because they take the malware and then they study their enemy or the entity that they want to attack onto, and then based on their study, their research that they have conducted on the entity that they want to attack, they then generate or include those bits, those intrusion capabilities in that malware that enable them to launch a successful attack on that entity. The individual components in an APT may not be technically advanced. You can still use the basic combination of the malicious softwares or the malicious software components, and you combine them because you have studied your enemy, and you are actually you have found the vulnerability. Now you know how to compromise that vulnerability. So you take the components, the small bits of malicious softwares, combine them, and then the cyber criminals launch that attack, or the state-sponsored espionage entities launch that attack against the entity on which they want to launch that attack. So in APTs, the most important thing is how well you know the enemy, how well the cyber criminals study the enemy or the entity on which they want to attack. There is no direct answer. It depends on the VPN service that you are using, and it depends on the security configurations that you are using in the VPN. If your security settings are still basic, like we discussed in week 1 about ADSL modems, I mean, if we are using the basic encryption mechanism, your password, your information can still easily be decrypted. I mean, you can have this feeling that I'm using encryption mechanism, but the encryption mechanism is outdated, and if you use that encryption mechanism, any threat entity can easily decrypt that traffic. So yes, VPN, if you are using the standard operating environment in a VPN, if you are using the outdated security technologies that have already been compromised, yes, VPN can be compromised. End of the day, it depends how well configured, how well security configured your device or the software component is. So what do we mean by the word persistent? Persistent means maintaining the presence in that system. Like Stuxnet, Black Energy, Triton, they are not kind of attack that were launched for a few hours or few minutes or few days, They maintained their persistence into the network, and then they were waiting for the triggering event. We will come to know the phases of viruses in the later slides. So the first step in an APT or any malware is to enable yourself to install that malware onto that system that you want to compromise. Once that malicious software is there, then you wait for the triggering event to trigger that enables that malware to become effective and start performing its intended action. So this is what we mean by the word persistent. And threats. By threats, we mean threats to the selected targets as a result of the organized, capable, and well-funded attackers intend to compromise the specifically chosen targets. What could be the aim? What could be the aims and techniques and the intents behind the APT attacks? The aim behind the APT attack is it varies from theft of intellectual property or security and infrastructure related data to the physical disruption of infrastructure. It depends on the target that you have studied. If it is a target which is a public sector organization, you may be looking to steal the intellectual property rights of that organization, because that private entity can be your competitor, in the market. So you may try to launch an attack with the aim that you want to steal the intellectual property of your competitor. When we talk about disrupting the physical infrastructure, like in the case of Black Energy, Triton, and Stuxnet, to that effect, we mean that we are actually launching an attack against the state. So a nation state or a state sponsored entity is launching an attack against another state or government. Like I gave you the example of Australian Parliament. The techniques that are used in APTs are social engineering, more specifically spear phishing emails, or drive-by downloads from selected compromised websites that are likely to be visited by the personnel that are working in the target organization. The intent behind the APT attacks is to infect the target with sophisticated malware with multiple propagation and payload mechanisms. So the first step in APT is to study your target. Second step, once you have studied your target, second step is to design a malware that actually exploit the vulnerability that you have found in the target, in your target. The third step is to find a way to deploy that or to install that malware into your threat organization. The techniques used to deploy that malware in that third step could be social engineering, spear phishing, drive-by download, USB stick, all sorts of things. The fourth step in an APT is to find that triggering event that you have configured in your malware, in your malicious software, because that is where we use the word persistence. The malware, if you have successfully done your step 3, then your malicious software is waiting for the triggering event to come, and as soon as that triggering event will arise, your malicious software will actually be launched. So that payload will actually be performed, will actually perform its action once that triggering event is activated. I will give you a 5-minute break after this video, but this video is about understanding Stuxnet. If you have watched earlier, watch it again, because this is going to give you more clarity on advanced persistent threats.
In June last year, a computer virus called Stuxnet was discovered lurking in the databanks of power plants, traffic control systems, and factories around the world. 20 times more complex than any previous virus code, it had an array of capabilities. Among them, the ability to turn up the pressure inside nuclear reactors or switch off oil pipelines, and Stuxnet could tell the system operators everything was normal. Unlike most viruses, Stuxnet doesn't carry the usual forged security clearance that helps viruses burrow into systems. It actually had a real clearance, stolen from one of the most reputable computer technology companies in the world. It exploited security gaps that system creators are unaware of. These holes are known as 0 days, and the most successful viruses exploit them. The details of a 0 day can be sold on the black market for $100,000. Stuxnet took advantage of 20 0 days. But once it got into a system, it didn't always activate. Buried deep in Stuxnet code was a specific target. Without that target, the virus remained dormant. What was it looking to shut down? The centrifuges that spin nuclear material at Iran's enrichment facilities. Stuxnet was a weapon, the first to be made entirely out of code. The Washington-based Institute for Science and International Security says the virus may have shut down 1,000 centrifuges at Natanz, Iran's main enrichment facility, last year. In November, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the UN's nuclear watchdog, said Iran had suspended work at its nuclear facilities without explaining why. Many observers credited Stuxnet. Last month, the Iranian government conceded the virus's infection of the Bashir nuclear facility, still under construction, meant that switching the plant on could lead to a national electricity blackout. Iran has responded to the attack with an open call for hackers to join the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, and has reportedly amassed the
Have I? Are you scared now? So you have come across the term of states. You have come across the term of state-sponsored espionage activities, where you have seen that Iran developed their second online army against those, because they felt that this attack was launched against us. So as a country, they thought that we should be giving more time, more resources to our online army. So they developed their cyber team, reportedly as this video was reporting. And like Iran, all other countries have got their cyber army, So they do all sorts of things. They are well funded, they are well resourced. They study the target organization, and then they launch the attacks against those target organizations. It's a dirty game, there's no doubt about it. But this is because we are all relying on digital infrastructures, critical infrastructures, industrial control systems. And since all those ICS or cyber physical systems use softwares in one way or the other, all softwares are prone to errors. So let's take a break for 5 minutes, and when we will meet again, we will discuss about viruses, worms, and other type of malware categories. So let's start again. If you notice the video, in the video, at the start of the video, the term was used, virus. In reality, Stuxnet was a worm. It was not a virus. It is because that we are used to people have stopped using the term malware. They are more using the word virus. So that is why there's a lack of consensus in the definition of all sorts of malware categories. If I give you my personal example, when I talk to people on malwares or tools or malwares like Stuxnet, Black Energy, or Triton, during the discussion they do ask me that was it a virus or a worm. So it is very difficult to convince people who follow a specific book or a specific reading that they have looked into. I would suggest you always start your discussion with the term malware. Do not get into these details, virus or worms. You should be knowing what is a virus, what is a worm, but try to start your discussion with the term malware. If you are able to define what a malware is, essentially you know how virus works, how worm works, but do not try to duplicate or interchange the definitions of these terminologies, and stick to the basic definition of the word malware. People still say that Stuxnet was a virus. In actual, or going by the terms that are there in the readings or in the books, Stuxnet was a worm. It was not a virus, because a worm replicates itself at its own. A virus doesn't. So how can we define virus? It's a piece of software that infects programs, modifies them to include a copy of the virus, replicates and goes on to infect other contents, easily spread through networked environments. When attached to an executable program, a virus can do anything that the program was permitted to do. A structure of virus has got three things. One is the infection mechanism, then the triggering event, and then the payload. Infection mechanism includes means by which a virus spreads or propagates, and it is also known as the infection vector. Triggering is an event or condition that determines when the payload is activated or delivered. Sometimes it is known as a logic bomb. When a certain condition is met, only then the virus or any form of malware will get activated. Payload, what the virus actually does besides spreading. Spreading is propagation, but when it actually tries to corrupt the data in the system, that is where the payload comes in. These are the phases of a malware. The first phase in a malware is a dormant phase, where the virus sits idle, does not perform any action. It is there, it is sitting there. Next is the triggering phase, like the condition we discussed in the case of logic bombs. Virus is activated to perform the function for which it was intended. It can be caused by a variety of system events. So once the virus is sitting in the system, it waits for this phase. As soon as the triggering event comes, it starts performing its intended function. Once the virus is triggered, it then enters into the propagation phase, where it places a copy of itself into other programs or into certain system areas on the disk. It may have a different propagation mechanism for the next version of the viruses, or it may follow the same mechanism that it followed here. And as soon as it is propagating, it is actually executing itself. It is performing the action it is intended to perform. Malware can be categorized by target or by concealment strategy. By target, we mean that where that virus is actually hitting, what it is actually compromising. Virus can compromise a boot sector, which is your master boot record on your hard disks. It can infect the files. That's why it is known as file infectors. It may infect the macros that you use in your Word document or Excel documents or any other relevant material. So the macros are the small programs that are embedded into the documents, Word documents, Excel documents, and etc. So it infects the vulnerability that is there in that macro, and it could be a multi-partite virus which infects the files in multiple ways. It can take any of the ways that we have discussed above. That's why they have called multi-partite viruses. The other classification strategy of viruses is by concealment strategy. A virus can encrypt itself entirely or the portion of the virus. Another concealment strategy is the stealth viruses. Yes. That? Can you come again, please? Both these strategies? I mean, we have classified these viruses for the sake of understanding by target or by concealment strategy. You know, if a virus may attack a Word document, may compromise this macro that is there in the Word document, and it can still be an encrypted virus. It can still be stealthier, so that it cannot be detected. It can still be a polymorphic virus, where it changes its form every time it infects the new Word document or a macro, or it could be a metamorphic virus which changes its state altogether. As the virus is propagating into the system or onto the network, it changes its forms entirely. If it is infecting one Word document which has got a macro, if it infects another Word document with the macro, it may take the form of a polymorphic virus, where it changes its state not entirely, but with some percentage. But if it changes its state totally, then it becomes a metamorphic virus. So yes, your answer is a virus can take concealment strategy, can be from this classification, and yes, it can come into this category as well. Out of these concealment strategies, you should understand the difference between a polymorphic viruses and what are metamorphic viruses, and what is the difference between these two. In polymorphic viruses, a virus changes with every infection, changes its form. Whereas in metamorphic viruses are polymorphic viruses, but they rewrite itself at each iteration and they change the behavior, the way they perform their action, it is entirely different to their earlier mechanism. So if you have been asked to define what is a metamorphic virus, it is a polymorphic viruses plus it rewrites itself completely at each iteration and it has the potential to change its behavior as well as its appearance. So what is a worm? A worm is a program that actively seeks out machines to infect, and each infected machine serves as an automated launching pad for attacks towards other machines. Typically, worms exploit software vulnerabilities in client or server programs. They make use of network connections, portable storage media such as portable hard drives, CDs, DVDs, USB sticks. Upon activation, the worm has the capability to replicate and propagate again, and it usually carries some form of payload. Generally, these are the steps that a worm takes when the worm is into the propagation mechanism. The worm scans for the targets on the networks. They locate a target with a vulnerability that could be exploited by the worm. They then exploit the identified vulnerability and establishes itself on that host, and then repeat that process by scanning for new targets that can be exploited at their own. And this is the main difference between a virus and a worm. A worm can be replicated using electronic mails or instant messenger facilities, through file sharing, through remote execution capability. If you want to copy a file from another system, the worm can be executed and while you are copying the file onto your system or to your friend's system, the worm can also be copied with that file. A worm can be replicated using remote file access or transfer capability. If you are using file transfer protocol or any such utility to transfer file, worm can be spread using that mechanism, and worm can be spread using remote login capability. If you remotely log into another computer, worm can come into your can attack your computer as well. So if someone asks you to remotely log into their computer, always make sure, do you actually want that remote login facility on your computer or not? Because you may be, as part of social engineering attack, you may log in remotely onto some computer which has already been infected, and once you are logged into that computer, some commands can be executed and that worm can be installed onto your computer as well. We know about metamorphic and polymorphic. Worms are multi-platform. They can be launched on any platform. It could be Windows, Linux, Mac, or any other platform. They are multi-platform worms. It will not matter that if a worm has attacked a Windows computer, and if you remotely log into Linux computer, that worm will not compromise the Linux operating system. Worm has the capability of being multi-platform. So any worm that has attacked a Windows machine, same worm can also attack a Linux machine as well. There could be multi-exploit strategies associated with the worm. It may take one exploit strategy to launch to compromise one system, but it can take other exploit strategies to exploit other system when it is scanning for other hosts on the network. Speed of the worm is very fast. Once it is activated, it is very difficult to stop a worm. That's why we have used the term ultra fast spreading. Relevant to worm, I want to include the example of WannaCry. You must be aware of this attack. We have been discussing using this name in the previous lecture as well. Some of you might have taken this as part of your assignment. WannaCry was launched in 2017, middle of the year. It was a ransomware attack. See, it is a worm as well as it is a ransomware. So it has taken multiple forms of a malware. WannaCry is a worm. It is also a ransomware. So ransomware also falls under the category of malware. So when WannaCry took the form of initially as worm, and once that worm entered into its execution phase, after meeting the some triggering mechanism or the logic, it changed its category and it transformed itself from being a worm to a ransomware malware. WannaCry spread rapidly, infecting hundreds of thousands of systems, both public and private. It is being said that it actually compromised more than 150 countries around the world during that time. And WannaCry was aggressively scanning for both random and local networks, looking for unpatched Windows versions. There was a service which is known as SMB that runs on the Windows operating system, and people who were using, or organizations who were using the unpatched Windows version, they were compromised using that vulnerability. Trojan horses. Trojan horse is a program that appears to be useful, but also performs a negative task to the computer, smartphone, IoT devices. So once you install that software, you feel that it is something useful. When I gave you the example of Angler, with the help of the diagram, the user who visited the legitimate website found that this ad is a legitimate, appears to be a legitimate ad, and its ad will be a useful ad for me. I need to go look into more details for this ad. But in between that Angler, there was an invisible action, and that action was something malicious. It was actually looking for the vulnerabilities that exist in the browser that the user was using. So such kind of viruses are known as, such kind of malwares are known as Trojan horses. Trojan horses can have different types. A functional program with an alternative malicious behavior, that is, every time the 7 is passed, 7 is pressed, a file is deleted at random. If you are using an online calculator for exam-to-mate, we need to allow this traffic out of our network and into our network. But in fact, the Trojan horse has been installed using some spear phishing, social engineering mechanism, or drive-by download mechanism, and that enabled the threat agent to monitor or to access that system because of the backdoor. Rootkits, they are a stealthy application designed to hide the fact that an operating system has been compromised. Typically encompasses 3 components: concealment, going undetected for prolonged duration. Rootkits have got a command and control mechanism that allows the system to be controlled remotely, and it has got a surveillance component, which by mean that methods we employ by which data of interest is collected and sent onwards. Another type of malware is logic bomb. A logic bomb usually performs a malicious action as a result of a certain logic condition. When that specific logic condition is met, the malware can be activated, and based on that activation, certain malicious actions can be performed. You may have come across this. You download some programs, some utilities as a trial version. As soon as the trial period expires, you are unable to use that software. So that example is not relevant to the intent behind the example that I have given you is not malicious, but yes, it is an example of a logic bomb. There is a logic behind that you are allowed to use this software free of cost for 30 days. As soon as the 30 days trial period expires, you are unable to use that utility anymore because of a logic that is configured behind that trial version of the software that you are using. Another kind of malware is drive-by downloads, and we have already studied this concept when we discussed Angler. Watering hole attacks are the advanced version of drive-by downloads. They are the targeted attacks, whereas drive-by downloads are not the targeted attacks. Attackers monitor the intended victims to identify websites they visit. Once they identify, they study their victim, they scan the visited website for vulnerabilities, and then from there on, whatever Angler was doing, the same step is repeated. Another form of malware is malvertising. It's a technique used to place malware on websites without compromising them. Attacker pays for the advertisement that has a high likelihood to be placed on target website, and malware is incorporated into that advertisement, and it's placed for a limited duration only to achieve the objective. As soon as that objective is met, the threat agent removes the advertisement from that website. So if you look into the concepts of drive-by downloads, malvertising, and watering hole attacks, they all sort of overlap with each other. The initial strategy is different, but once that initial technique is met, the remaining steps all are almost similar. Spyware, they infect your computer. Once your computer is infected, it could be a keystrokes, password, or screen captures. It attempts to collect all information that you are actually typing, your login credentials, and whatever you are viewing on your screen. And based of this, the spyware process periodically sends collected data to spyware data collection agent or the threat agent, who is actually studying or wants to have more and more information about the victim. Next is scareware. It's a trick a user follows and downloads the software. Like if you are browsing on the internet, and if you get the prompt that your computer is unsecured, click on this link and we are going to install this utility on your computer. And people who have got less awareness or have got no awareness about these scarewares and the malware in general, they fell prey to those kind of ads, and they download that software on their computer. And this, in reality, those utilities are the malicious softwares, and they then perform the activities like spyware or what we call logic bombs or anglers and all sorts of things. Ransomware, we have discussed ransomware a little bit. We can define ransomware malware as software that kidnaps a user's computer by encrypting a drive or files and then demanding payment, usually in the form of bitcoins, to decrypt that information. And so at times the ransomware message tells the user that if you will not pay within the next certain amount of time, maybe 72 hours, 24 hours, or 48 hours, the key will be destroyed. Once the encryption key is destroyed, there is no way to decrypt that data. If the encryption algorithm that has been used is strong enough, and the key is also the key length is good. So recent ransomware versions allow users to decrypt a few live files for free to prove that they can be recovered. So just to develop the trust level on for the victim, in order to be able to get money out of that victim, they give the demo that you see if I can delete few files from your system, and based on that or decrypt a few files for you. Once the user or the victim comes to know that yes, it's the real threat agent who has the decryption key for my files, so that actually gives him the confidence. Yes, there's no other mechanism. I need to pay for this. I've got no backup with me, so I need to pay for whatever he's asking for within this specific amount of time in order to be able to get my data back. This is kind of the message that we get if we are compromised with any form of ransomware attack. Social engineering focus attacks, we know what is a social engineering, and we know what mechanisms are used to launch a social engineering attack. Mainly spams, Trojan horses, and mobile phone Trojans are launched against social engineering methods, social engineering attacks. So what could be the malware countermeasures? We have discussed about malwares. We know how these malwares propagates, what payload they contain. What could be the countermeasures for malware? So the 4 main elements of prevention against malware, you need to have a strong policy in place. If we are talking about the corporate organizations, or if we talk about the individual computers, we need to have the policy that yes, I need to patch my computers, my softwares that I'm using. If that is the policy, then you will be safe. Otherwise, if you don't patch your softwares, if you open your computer without any security control, then your computer is all set to be compromised. There is no option that you can save yourself from the malicious entities. Awareness, training, mitigation of the vulnerabilities, and you need to know how to mitigate the threats. So these are the 4 general elements of prevention against the malwares. So if the prevention mechanism fails, the mitigation options are detection, locate the malware, identify the specific malware, and once you have got enough information about the malware that has actually compromised, then you get into the step of removing that malware. So you look for the malware, you try to find this is the malware that has actually attacked, and then you search for the solutions that are available out there that can actually save you from that malware that deletes the malware from your computer. There are many generations of antivirus softwares. The first generation was simple scanners. Simple scanners use malware signatures to identify the malware, and their detection capability was limited because they were only helpful in stopping the malwares that have already been detected and their signatures are known. If there is a new attack that has not been detected earlier, or whose signature is not available in the antivirus software that you are using, or to that effect, if you have not updated the virus definitions of your antivirus software, then you are not safe if in the first generation of antivirus solutions, because they are the simple scanners. The second generation is the heuristic scanners. Heuristic means studying the behavior of the malware, and if the behavior of the malware of the software utility that the antivirus software is studying gives the indication that this utility is performing some malicious actions, then it actually deletes or prompts you that you have got your computer appears to be compromised. You need to delete this software utility or this software component from your computer. The third generation is activity traps. They are memory resident programs that identify malware by its actions rather than its structure in an infected program. So the third generation malware antivirus softwares, they are installed they are available on the memory such as RAM, and then based on that memory they study the activities that are going through on your computer, and if they form any malicious activity, they prompt or they delete that program from the computer. The last category or the generation of antivirus software is full featured protection. They are the packages consisting of a variety of antivirus techniques. They are simple scanners, heuristic scanners, activity traps, a combo of 3 or any such activity used in conjunction. And if you have got full featured protection, you are more safer than if you are using any one type of these antivirus softwares. We have discussed about signatures. What are signatures? I'll just quickly go through this slide. Each malware specimen has a unique set of instructions, and those instructions are known as signatures or fingerprints. So antivirus softwares have those signatures or fingerprints configured in their database, and if when you install a new software, that antivirus software scans that signature fingerprint with the installed software, and if that matches, it prompts you that yes, you have got an antivirus, you have got a virus, and you need to remove it. The limitation: if this antivirus software uses a signature database to detect known malware, so if there is unknown malware or your antivirus software is not patched with the latest virus definitions, then you are at risk of being compromised. Sometimes we come across the term false positive, which means that a safe file or a legitimate file has instructions similar to a known virus file or known malware file, and your antivirus software is still saying that the software that you have installed appears to be a non-legitimate software, and you need to uninstall this, or you cannot proceed further. So in such case, if you have got a file which you can trust, but your antivirus is saying that you cannot install that software, you may need to deactivate your antivirus software to be able to use this utility. So false positive are bound to happen because there could be files which are safe, which are good, but yet their instructions or their fingerprints or their signatures are similar to malwares. The two types of antivirus softwares are shielded and on-demand. Shielded software runs at the background. They work like the daemons work, and they scan when a file is touched. As soon as you open or copy a file, they scan that file. On-demand is scan on explicit user request. You need to make a request that yes, I want to run the scanning on this file, on this folder, or on this drive. Other than the antivirus softwares that you install on your computers, there are some online antivirus softwares, and you have got free browser plugins that you may install on your browsers to scan the files that you suspect are appears to be non-legitimate. One such example of online antivirus software is VirusTotal. You can upload any file, any URL, and once you upload, you click the button. VirusTotal runs all sorts of scanning mechanism that it has, like heuristics, meta heuristics, and based on those configurations, it gives you the result that yes, this file appears to be suspicious, this file is not suspicious. So during today's tutorial activity, if you want to test any Word document or any other utility, go on to VirusTotal and upload a file, click on this button, and you will be given the results of that activity or the analysis. If you want to search for a URL, you can do that as well. Copy a URL, paste on the URL text field that comes here, click on the button, and VirusTotal will run all sorts of analysis that it has got in its database, and you will come to know the results of that URL, whether that URL is legitimate or a bad URL. So before we discuss our today's tutorial activity, what is the future of malware? What will malware look like in the future? Ransomware, we have already come across this. What about IoT devices? What about smart homes, like shown in this diagram? What could be the implication for hospitals? What could be the implications if you are traveling on a plane and you have got that plane is being controlled by the softwares? What could be the implication in critical infrastructure? We have discussed the example of Stuxnet that nuclear facility was a critical infrastructure. We've discussed about black energy. The Ukraine's power grid was a critical infrastructure. We've discussed about Triton. The Saudi Aramco petrochemical company was a critical infrastructure. We have discussed about energetic beer. All those power energy firms were the critical infrastructures for those countries. So we have already started to see the effect of malware on our critical infrastructures, industrial control systems, SCADA systems, or cyber physical systems. Cyber warfare. Essentially, the discussion that we had in today's lecture with regards to advanced persistent threats, 0 days, the video that we have played in today's lecture, another movie that documentary movie that I'm going to ask you to watch during this week, they all take us to this concept, which is cyber warfare. It is easier to hire a dozen hackers than it is to buy a dozen missiles. So if you have got a cyber army, it is cheaper and easier than buying missiles to launch attack against a state or a nation. Can malware be the form of terrorism in the future? What do you think? Yes, we have already seen this effect. Malware have become the form of terrorism in today's world. There's no need for us to go into the future, Terrorist organizations have got their cyber army, and that cyber army is launching malicious attacks against the nations. And then this bullet. So this brings us to the end of today's lecture, but before we to our tutorial activities, I want to show you something here. And this is your blackboard. If you go to unit schedule, under module 3, this is your tutorial activity, and in addition to this, the instructions or the activities that you have to perform, you need to, this is very basic. For some of you, it is very easy. You might have been much ahead of these steps, but for those or the majority of you who have just come across this virtual machine and Linux, I assume and I hope that by this time, because we are into our 3rd week, you have installed your virtual machine and your Kali Linux is up and running. So if this is true, can you log into your Kali Linux? Do you know what a terminal is in Linux? If yes, can you open your terminal? Can you find the IP address that is assigned to your Kali Linux? What is that IP address? And can you access the internet in your Kali? Very basic things for some of you, but if you have for others, if you have installed virtual machine and your Kali is running, please do these steps in the tutorial today or sometime today. In your tutorial document, there are some questions, true and false, multiple choice questions. The answers to these questions are available at the end of this document, but I would urge you to try to solve these questions at your own, and then compare your answers, compare your understanding with the correct answers that are available at the end of this document. There is the answers to discussion questions is not available because these are the discussion questions, and it will have a different understanding. I mean, all of you will have a different understanding of these discussion questions. So the answers to these discussion questions will not be provided, but all other questions, you've got the answers at the end of this document. When I was designing your online test, I didn't look into all these questions, but this will help you in developing your understanding, and this will enable you to score good in your online test. Your online test is expiring on Monday 18th before 2 o'clock, and very few of you have attempted that test. So try to attempt that test before Monday 2 p.m. Do not delay that test. If you go on to the additional content page here, look into this definition. I have taken this from your book, Williams Tellings, and I have added all the definitions of the malware terminologies. Keep it handy, have a read, try to understand the definition. But as I said, these definitions overlap, and it depends on the reading or the book that you are referring to. I have added a NIST reading which is relevant to malware. It's a 47-page document. I don't expect you to read all. Keep it handy. Try to understand the basic definition of malware and how it is related to confidentiality, integrity, and availability, because this is what we are trying to understand in this course. The last thing is, if you want to develop your understanding in APTs or 0 days, and understand what cyber warfare is, please do this step. You need to watch. It is not mandatory. If you do it, that will be good for your own understanding. There's a movie which is available, easily available on YouTube, which is with the name 0 Days, released in 2016. It's a documentary on Stuxnet and cyber warfare and what is a nation state-sponsored espionage activity. It will help you in understanding your developing your understanding what a cyber warfare is, what is a malware, what are APTs, what are 0 days. I have created a separate discussion board on a separate thread on the discussion board in the morning, and if you can contribute here, inform your peers of how this documentary has changed your thinking in the computer security domain. It is not an essential activity, but if you watch that video, that documentary, and if you can post some of your comments here, that would be good for your peers and understanding what others are thinking after watching that documentary. That's it. I'll see you in the tutorials, and we will meet again next week.